So we've got some updates for you guys with regard to Mahmoud Khalil. He is that green card holder and student activist who has been detained, and they are the Trump administration is attempting to deport. So let's go ahead and start with this. Comments from Tom Homan, who was in Albany, New York, to speak on exactly this issue and sounding a bit of a different note on free speech than the Trump campaign certainly did when he was campaigning, and notably J.D. Vance did when he was over in Europe. Let's take a listen to that.
Free speech has limitations, but when you go to a college campus, you incite protesting and locking down and taking over buildings and damaging property and handing out leaflets for Hamas, who is a terrorist organization. Coming to this country either on a visa or becoming a resident alien is a great privilege, but there are rules associated with that.
So again, I think it's really important to remind people that Mahmoud Khalil has not been accused of a crime. The justification they're using for the stripping of his green card status and potential deportation is that Marco Rubio determined that he was a threat to our national security priority of combating anti-Semitism. We also have some more details about Khalil himself that we'll get to in a moment. In particular, you notice the charges against him are always very vague. He's like affiliated with this literature that, by the way, we haven't been allowed to see. He said things that we're supposed to assume are anti-Semitic. There's been very little specifics of what he's done or what he said that is so egregious that he no longer exists in this country. So keep that in mind as well. Let me go ahead and play Secretary of State Marco Rubio also giving his justification, sounding some similar notes to Tom Homan. Let's take a listen.
When you come to the United States as a visitor, which is what a visa is, which is how this individual entered this country, as on a visitor's visa, okay? You are here as a visitor. We can deny you that visa. We can deny you that if you tell us when you apply, hi, I'm trying to get into the United States on a student visa. I am a big supporter of Hamas, a murderous, barbaric group that kidnaps children, that rapes teenage girls, that takes hostages, that allows them to die in captivity, that returns more bodies than live hostages. If you tell us that you are in favor of a group like this, and if you tell us when you apply for your visa, and by the way, I intend to come to your country as a student and rile up all kinds of anti-Jewish student, anti-Semitic activities, I intend to shut down your universities. If you told us all these things when you applied for a visa, we would deny your visa. I hope we would. If you actually end up doing that, once you're in this country on such a visa, we will revoke it. And if you end up having a green card, not citizenship, but a green card as a result of that visa while you're here in those activities, we're going to kick you out. It's as simple as that. This is not about free speech. This is about people that don't have a right to be in the United States to begin with. No one has a right to a student visa. No one has a right to a green card, by the way. So when you apply for a student visa, or any visa to enter the United States, we have a right to deny you for virtually any reason. But I think being a supporter of Hamas and coming into our universities and turning them upside down and being complicit in what are clearly crimes of vandalization, complicit in shutting down learning institutions. There are kids at these schools that can't go to class. You pay all this money to these high-priced schools that are supposed to be of great esteem, and you can't even go to class. You're afraid to go to class because these lunatics are running around with covers on their face, screaming terrifying things. If you told us that's what you intended to do when you came to America, we would have never let you in. And if you do it once you get in, we're going to revoke it and kick you out.
So a few things to note there. So he says he's a quote unquote big supporter of Hamas. It seems like they just assume anyone who is like pro-Palestine and has a critique of either the Israeli government or our government support of the Israeli government, they just label as pro-Hamas. But if we could put D6 up on the screen, Ryan drops like they've been doing some digging into, okay, like what did this guy actually say and what was he all about? One of the things that you hear repeatedly on like right-wing influencer accounts and people like Scott Jennings, et cetera, is that he called for the quote-unquote total eradication of Western civilization. Now, even if he did, I would say, hey, protected speech. That is vastly different from saying I'm a Hamas supporter or even further, which again, I think would be protected speech. But there's no allegation he like provided material support for Hamas or any other terrorist quote-unquote organization. But let's just parse the claim that he even is the person who said this total eradication of Western civilization thing. Apparently, they're getting that from an Instagram post from a group that he was loosely affiliated with that he had nothing to do with this Instagram post and may not have even have seen. So I want you to think about that. The government is using, in part, a post that he was tangentially linked to, that he potentially had no even knowledge of, to justify detaining him. He's now been, flown down to Louisiana and held indefinitely there, and stripping him of his permanent resident status and potentially deporting him. Like, that is incredibly wild. And, you may think this will never apply to you and it's all fine and good, et cetera, but we have seen the whole trajectory of post 9/11 and the war on terror, et cetera, has been going step by step by step, taking away more and more and more civil liberties and expanding the police and surveillance state. And this is a dramatic jump on that trajectory.
Yeah, that's the thing about what Rubio keeps saying. It's like, yeah, no one's saying that you can't do it. It's whether should you do it and for what purpose. That's the question that I really have around this is the guy didn't commit a crime. Yeah, he's the leader of a group which some people didn't like. Okay. There's a lot of groups, a lot of leaders that I don't like that I'm sure here are on student visas too. Are they all going to get kicked out? If you're the leader of the IDF soldier, whatever, former IDF soldiers on UCLA campus, that's good to go. What are we doing here? That's the big issue that I really have with not only the precedent of deportation and really the invocation of the INS Act against this person, because we have to remember, he's saying it's a serious detriment to our foreign policy. Well, what does that mean? That his presence here is a serious detriment to our foreign policy with Israel? What, Israel's going to cut off relations with us over a campus protester in the United States of America?
Well, they're specifically saying we have a foreign policy priority of combating anti-Semitism.
Okay, so first of all, I don't even know if that's true. But second, let's assume that it is true. What definition? Oh, the definition which conflates like any criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. The whole thing is preposterous. And that's where the big problem that it all comes back to is that we are having a debate here about somebody who was here protesting the actions of a foreign government. Even if you look back to the Patriot Act era, at least then we were demonizing each other over the actions of our government. This is something so contrary to any of those ideals, of even many of the criticisms or whatever that they've made about free speech overreach in the past, and just basic to the notion of anything that's supposed to be America first. But I do have bad news. To be honest, the government has good standing. There is the basic truth here is you can revoke the visa of whoever you want. But that's not, the point is not can you, it's should you, and for what purpose. And why? This is what I can't get around either. Who picked this guy as the first one? Wouldn't you pick somebody who was in Hamilton Hall or whatever, breaking windows? There's no argument on that one. It's like, yeah, you committed a crime here, bro. You got to go. But for the rest of them, deporting a, quote, student leader who has committed no actual crime, been charged with nothing, basically for statements, it's like, where did this name get plucked and who decided that this was the ground to, I actually cannot think of a worse one. Because first you would pick a student visa, wouldn't you? And then you would, not a green card holder, because the
which
rights
I
are
think
different.
they thought he was here on just a student visa and they didn't check.
So first they pick somebody who's on a green card, not a student visa. Then they pick somebody who didn't commit a crime. It's like you would, ideally, if you wanted to set a precedent or, make a big stand, you'd pick a guy on a student visa who did commit a crime. It's an open and shut case. That's easy as hell to deport somebody for. And a lot harder to argue against, in my opinion.
The other way to look at it, and I'm not sure on the legal piece, you might be right, but there is a legal battle that will unfold here, and it's not entirely clear-cut which way it will go. It does look like the administration is like immigration judge shopping. That's why Khalil was flown all the way down to Louisiana, was because I think they like their chances there better than they did in New York or New Jersey. But in any case, one way to look at it is like, oh, this is such a screw up. They should have picked someone who committed a crime. It was on a student visa. It was open and shut. No one could even I couldn't say that it was, that they didn't have the right to do it. And it would represent a much less profound abridging of civil rights than what a permanent resident, and also he's just a sympathetic guy. I'm about to show you a video of him as well, and you'll see his wife is 8 months pregnant. She's an American citizen. You listen to him talk on CNN, et cetera, and he's saying, I actually think the liberation of the Jewish people and the Palestinian people go hand in glove, and that's why I support equal rights for all. People have been digging through everything this man has said at this point and have not come up with anything that is even I don't think should be out of bounds at all. So, there was no I love Hamas and way to go on October 7th. If there was, trust me, you would have heard about it by now. And when he's given interviews, and he gave a lot of interviews in his role as a student leader here, he was, quite clear about his commitment to equality and dignity for both the Palestinian people and the Jewish people. But in any case, I think the other way you can look at it is that by taking a maximalist stand with this relatively sympathetic person who didn't commit a crime, who is a permanent resident and not a visa holder, they are, first of all, inviting a huge freakout, which they seem to relish. And second of all, once you've gotten away with that, then everything else is easy, right? Then you've laid all this track and created this massive space within which you can operate. So I'm not sure that it's the sort of tactical mistake. I don't even think they seem to relish this fight. They seem to feel that they are on very firm political ground and are quite happy to use Mahmoud Khalil and make an example of him.
In the immediate term, I think we're being honest, they probably are on good political ground. People don't really care much about Palestine protesters outside of the left. If you still look at the overall approval rating for Israel, still quite high, especially amongst Republicans, amongst boomers. It's definitely true. Things have changed amongst the Democrats, but nobody's shedding tears really for student protesters.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
You're probably right. I will say, listen, being the free speech party was a core part of their pitch this time around.
You're asking for ideological consistency from the likes of Cat
right, but I'm saying, they were able to take if you looked at the specifics of, this or that white nationalist saying terrible things, you would say, okay, well, this isn't really good political ground. But when they framed it in the context of no, this is a fight over free speech and they're the cancel culture ones and they're snowflakes and the woke mob and whatever, it ended up being very politically powerful for them. So there's nothing that says that similar abuses directed at Mahmoud Khalil, and they say that, he's the first of many to come, can't similarly turn people off. And, and also the overreaches of post 9/11, eventually there was a backlash against that as well. So you may well be correct, but I don't think it's quite as clear cut as that. But I do want to share with you guys, and then we'll get to his lawyer, et cetera. But I do want to share with you, because we've talked so much about him, Mahmoud Khalil, in his own words, he actually was filmed as part of a documentary put together. Breakthrough News shared this. It's being released this year by Watermelon Pictures and executive produced by Macklemore. And they have an interview in here with Mahmoud Khalil talking about his family's journey and how they ended up in this refugee camp in Syria. This is D7, guys. D7, go ahead and play this.
I was born and raised in a Palestinian refugee camp in southern Damascus in Syria. My family's history in Palestine actually goes back to as long as my grandparent could trace it. They lived in a very small village right next to Tiberias. Mostly they were farmers. My grandmother, she used to tell us that she had Jewish neighbors. They would share a piece of land where they would farm it. Tiberias was one of the first cities that the Zionists targeted in 1948 with ethnic cleansing. In April 1948, a month before the Nakba, the Zionist militias, they burned one of their villages. When they heard the news about it, they had to leave immediately. Some of the men went to fight. Big families, they had to go to Syria. My grandmother, she was pregnant at that time. She had to walk 40 miles. She gave birth on the way. When they arrived in the refugee camp, they thought it's just a matter of days until they would go back. They did not want to be killed because they heard about the horror stories across Tiberias. My dad was born in a tent. His family lived in that tent until like mid-70s when they upgraded to small structures. In the 90s, they finally kind of like had concrete buildings. To us, it was always a temporary home until we go back to Palestine.
So that's a little bit of his backstory there and how his family ended up in this refugee camp in Syria. We do have some legal updates for you guys with regard to his case. You could put D3 up on the screen here. So there was a hearing in federal district court in Manhattan yesterday about the nature of his detention. And so the judge ordered, and again, this is a federal district court, so this is not an immigration judge. He will also see an immigration judge about the merits of his case and whether or not the government has offered sufficient grounds to revoke his green card and deport him. But they said he has to remain in Louisiana for now. He set a schedule for Wednesday for the lawyers to present written arguments later this week. He said his order to keep Khalil in an immigration detention facility in Louisiana was not due to the merits of any arguments, but to provide time to address the important issues that this case raises. The judge directed Khalil's lawyers be allowed phone calls with their client, which apparently is something that has been blocked up to this point. The lawyer was having a huge amount of difficulty getting in touch with Mahmoud Khalil, and his lawyer said our access to our client is severely limited by the fact that he is in Louisiana. Let's go ahead and take a listen to a little bit of Mahmoud Khalil's lawyer talking about, their belief that they'll be vindicated with the case. And also he talked a little bit too about here the role of Colombia. And there's been some reporting come out, and emails were released that Mahmoud was messaging the administrators, Colombian, saying, look, I really fear for my safety. I'm getting all of these threats. I fear ICE is going to come in and snatch me up. And they did nothing. And of course, this is exactly what happened. Let's go ahead and take a listen to his lawyer.
Every day that Mahmoud spends in detention in Louisiana is a day too long. We and he fully intend to vindicate not just his First Amendment rights, but those of all Americans, frankly, and all lawful permanent residents, and anybody who wants to speak out. It simply cannot be the case that you can be disappeared. To basically put the university on notice that he was feeling unprotected by the university, and that he was worried about detention by ICE and doxing and actions by private actors. He was in fear for his life and well-being. That is accurate. He did send that email to the head of Columbia University, and I think his email raises an important question. This is a university that has spent the better part of the last year talking about its duty to protect students and to keep them safe. But in a scenario where numerous students are being approached by ICE on Columbia's campus, and one Columbia student, Mahmoud Khalil, has been effectively disappeared by U.S. government agents, again, on Columbia's property, the university has been remarkably absent and silent.
And the university is coming under increasing scrutiny. There was a New York Times article that went inside a pretty stunning meeting that happened on campus. You could put this up on the screen. So the headline here is, at Columbia, tension over Gaza protests hits a breaking point under Trump. Let me read you a little bit of this. They say, days after immigration officers arrested a prominent pro-Palestinian campus activist, administrators at Columbia University gathered students and faculty from the journalism school and issued a warning. Students who were not U.S. citizens should avoid publishing work on Gaza, Ukraine, and protests related to their former classmates' arrest, urged Stuart Carl, a First Amendment lawyer and adjunct professor. With about 2 months to go before graduation, their academic accomplishments or even their freedom could be at risk if they attract the ire of the Trump administration. Quote, if you have a social media page, make sure it is not filled with commentary on the Middle East, he told the gathering in Pulitzer Hall. When a Palestinian student objected, the journalism school's dean, Jelani Cobb, was more direct about the school's inability to defend international students from federal prosecution. Quote, nobody can protect you, Mr. Cobb said. These are dangerous times.
Yeah, I don't know why everyone's mad at him. He's right. He worked, what, you're going to go up against the United States government? What are you talking about? And look, I mean, I talked about this before, but I know a lot of leftists don't want to hear this. You don't have a right to be here. You are a guest in our country. And if you're going to shit stir against the current U.S. government, good luck to you. I wish you the best.
You're a green card holder?
But even if
you
you're
have the same First Amendment rights.
You have a First Amendment right to say what you want. The government has a right to be able to revoke your citizenship or revoke your residency,
really
which they're going to.
True.
No, even if they provide him due process and they can make this case based on the INS, he's going to go. Maybe it'll take 3 months, maybe it'll take 6. You don't have a right to be here. This is where I do get a little bit annoyed at this idea that, what are they supposed to protect you? By what? Standing in the door against the government? Okay. Again, on a sympathy perspective, you're not winning. You're not a citizen. You can't just come here and expect to be able to do whatever you want without consequence.
Well, I think the expectation that you would be able to protest a foreign government and critique policies, I think, is a very reasonable
Look,
one.
I think
and in
you
fact,
should
if you
be
are
able
a permanent
to, but we
resident,
live in reality.
you do have First Amendment rights and free speech rights. So, if it was a student visa holder, then the legal case is much more clear. With this, no. I mean, this is true, like, McCarthyite, Red Scare insanity. And I understand what you're saying about, like, he is right, nobody can protect you. The other piece, but this comes in the context of Columbia University making a big show about how their number one priority is student safety.
Sure.
In the context of, Jewish students who were upset by the protests. But now that you have one of your own students being snatched from your campus without a warrant even being offered, after he came to you and was like, please, I need help, and you did nothing, that's where comments like this end up landing very poorly. But, the other thing I would say about this is exactly the reaction that the Trump administration is, expects and is manufacturing. And, that it will chill all protests and speech, and people will be afraid to speak out. They'll be afraid to post on social media. They'll be afraid to go to the protests. They'll be afraid to write articles. There was somebody who wrote an op-ed at Columbia who got, disciplined by the Columbia University administration, et cetera. And so, this is the goal of this policy, is to make an example of him and to scare people from speaking out on this issue. I don't know if you saw this. This is crazy, just like side note, but I think is sort of facilitated and encouraged by this crackdown from the Trump administration, which is the mayor of Miami is trying to pull the lease of an independent movie theater that dared to show the Oscar award-winning documentary about the occupied West Bank, No Other Land. They had a screening of it, and now he's trying to pull the lease so that this theater is destroyed. Like, this climate is insane. It really is not safe for anyone to offer, their criticism of a foreign government and to have this this crackdown and this spectacle and use Mahmoud Khalil, who again committed no crimes. We've been offered no evidence even that he was, a supporter of Hamas or anything. They just assume he is because he was pro-Palestinian. Like, it's outrageous. People should be disgusted by it.
I have no disagreement that this is not what should happen. But I also think if you're an international student and if you value your presence here in the United States, Jelani Cobb is correct. And that it's like, what point do you want? Maybe if you want to create a spectacle of yourself getting deported, okay, fine. But, you should be honest too about that. I just see Cobb getting attacked over this. He is correct. The government has immense power. I really just don't know what reality people are living in. One for hypocrisy, like, yeah, you're right. Are these the Jewish student safety, and is that all bullshit? Absolutely, 100%. Elections have consequences. I mean, who do you think won the election and is now setting this standard?
I was told this was the free speech party.
I mean,
that
Krystal,
government censorship was going to be a thing of the past.
We can all point hypocrisy in all directions, and nobody is truly ideological consistent. I think this is bad. I think that a lot of conservative free speech people are either humiliated by this, silent, and or showing themselves, despite getting filthy rich off of talking about identity politics and cancel culture, are now cheering this on. Yeah, you should, absolutely speak out against them and vote with your dollars or your eyeballs or how say you to speak. But I also think these students are going to get shit advice if they're being told, like, we're going to protect you. Nobody can protect you against the government and against visa.
An authoritarian government.
No, but you are not. This is where I get annoyed. You're not an American citizen. At the end of the day, you can kick you out no matter what. You should take that into consideration.
That is not true, though, Saagar. Permanent residents
all you have to do,
almost all the same rights as citizens.
Krystal, he can be offered due process.
To due process.
Yes, and he will get it, and he will still lose.
And here's the other thing, Saagar, is that they invented, it's not like this provision has been routinely used, and everyone should know that, Marco Rubio can just decide that you're a threat to our national security, which is utterly preposterous. The idea that Mahmoud Khalil is undermining our global fight against anti-Semitism, which, by the way, nothing is sparking more anti-Semitism than Israel's genocide in Gaza and our enabling of it. So, maybe there's some people who need to be deported for the way that they're sparking anti-Semitism with their approach to all of this. But putting all of that aside, this has almost never been used in this way. Like, I don't know that it has ever been used in this way. So again, the legal theory is not at all settled. You do have rights as a permanent resident green card holder. Mahmoud did not do anything wrong here whatsoever. And if it was the shoe was on the other foot and you had Joe Biden and Kamala Harris saying that anti-racism is one of our foreign policy goals.
Well, they did.
And we're going to deport anyone who is either on a student visa or a green card holder who is a Trump supporter because we believe Trump is racist and his movement is racist and this undermines our foreign policy. That would also be insane. And the right would be correctly up at arms. And it would be authoritarian. And it would be an abridgment of free speech and First Amendment rights. So yeah, this is an outrageous assault on civil rights of everyone. Because if they can find some little provision that they can hang their hat on to try to revoke this guy's permanent resident status and deport him, you don't think that they can find some little provision that can criminalize your speech for saying something very similar, even if you are a US citizen? Like, they just are pushing the bounds as much as they possibly can. And there is not just nothing to protect people who are from a foreign country. There is nothing to protect anybody at this point.
Well, I see, that's where I just think that's not true. I mean, at the end of the day, you're right that Mahmoud is due process, but they can just give him due process and still deport him. I mean, listen, I hope that the legal theory doesn't end up correctly, because I don't want this definition of anti-Semitism to stand, period. I would hope that the Supreme Court would be able to strike it down as an obvious overreach, but that's just not really how they've interpreted the law in the past whenever it does come to the ability to have deportation proceedings against somebody else. And I understand why people are getting upset. As I said, I think the principle is really, really bad. I guess I'm just coming back to these international students seem to think that they have a, quote, right to be here, to be able to say what they want and also stay here. And it's like, guys, nobody should be giving you that opinion. Like, really, Jelani Cobb, I think, was correct. You're not wrong that they're hypocritical in terms of how they are phrasing all this stuff about student safety. But I mean, if you really believed all of that, I didn't know what to tell you. It's pretty obvious from the beginning. They got their $400 million cut, and of course this is a reaction. Robert Kraft Center for $100 million. You think gives it to them for free? Like, what do you think this whole thing is about, right? This is a private money-making scheme that's basically, I guess, built on idealism and shelling out $80,000 a year. So if anything, it's more like removing the veneer of where all this is about. But I also don't think that this is necessarily, I'm not saying this isn't an assault on free speech principles, but it is still fundamentally different than a United States citizen. You know, if a United States citizen is having their actual rights abridged by the government as a result of what they say about a foreign conflict, that's genuinely another matter whenever it comes to this. And I don't think the Trump administration will go there, because everybody knows that would be categorically 100 times more insane than what's happening here.
Last point, there is a distinction because he's a green card holder and not an American citizen. However, he does have this, and that's why this is a dangerous abridgment of everyone's First Amendment rights, because he does have the same First Amendment rights that an American citizen has. Mm-hmm. And that's why, I mean, what we've seen since the passage of the Patriot Act is step by step by step by step, more and more civil liberties taken away. And so if this abridgment of his First Amendment rights, which again are the same as yours and mine, if that is allowed to stand, yes, that has potential reverberating impacts on American citizens as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's a fair point. We'll continue to cover the proceedings, because the point there is still very important for what the court case actually decides. I hope that they strike it down, specifically this anti-Semitism definition. There's nothing stupider than that. And don't forget, there have been previous legal challenges. Abby Martin successfully challenged that BDS law in Georgia. I hope it becomes a national standard, and I would love to see it. There's nobody who would like it more than me. But I do think it's, you're playing with fire too whenever you're going up against the US government. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.